Mulembe Mutinzi Cuusansi.
Ebyali byatutwalirako babitudize.
Mulembe Mutinzi Cuusansi.
Ne mwali mwasiba otulo kati tuzukuse.
Well, Wangoola and I thought that we should start where the story begins for each of us, and then we will see how it has come together to be what it is, how it's being understood today at this wonderful event in May of 2017 in Jinja, Uganda.
Mulembe Mutinzi Cuusansi.
Ebyali byatutwalirako babitudize.
My name is Bud Hall, and I come from Victoria, Canada, the University of Victoria. And I've been friends with Wangoola for some 40 years. And together we have been on a journey which has brought us in May of 2017 to Jinja at this wonderful, international transformative confluence. And we said we should start with each of our personal stories and see how those stories weave together over the years to bring us to this point. So for me, my story begins in 1964. I was a student at university, and I had the opportunity to go to Nigeria, to a brand new university, University of Nigeria. And what I found, I took courses there with a historian, a Nigerian historian, a Nigerian political scientist, and a Nigerian anthropologist. And I was a young, white fellow, and they told us that they were going to introduce us to African history from an African perspective. And then I went to the political science class, and the guy over there, he said the same. He said, we understand political science differently. We have a different frame of reference and a different value system around politics than they do elsewhere. And that confused me a great deal, because for me, history was history. History is just whatever happened. The idea that history looked different depending on who you were, where you were, history, time, power, and so forth, this was an introduction to me. And so from that point on, I was open and looking for some deeper way to pull those ideas together so that I would have a better chance to comprehend the world. So I met Wangoola in England, actually, in about 1974 or 75. He was studying at the University of Southampton, and I was studying at Sussex. And both of us at the time were Marxist scholars, and we were both looking at the political economy, in his case of Uganda, adult education in Uganda, my case, adult education in Tanzania. So we met and shared ideas and thoughts. And then, much to our great pleasure and surprise, we became very close work colleagues in the international adult education movement, where Wangoola was Secretary General of the African movement, and I had a job with the International Association headquartered in Toronto. But I was, as Wangoola and I found ourselves thinking a lot about what did it mean, what were the African roots of adult education? What is it from the history and the thousands of years of storytelling and meaning in Africa that would give adult education here a distinctive shape? And we struggled a lot, because all of the ideas about adult education were coming from European countries, how you do it, how you organize it, how you finance it. And when we would try, and we would find a lot of a lot of resistance.
My name is Wangoola Ndaula, and I have worked with my brother Bad for more than 40 years, and what has kept us together is looking for some alternative paradigm for the liberation of the oppressed. My own story starts from my family. I come from a family where my father was active in politics. He was part of the independence movement, but he soon discovered that his role in the independence movement was limited, or would be limited, by the level of education he had. So while he was in the independence struggle, he made sure that he sends as many of his children to school as possible. And I was one of the children whom he sent to school. His idea, his work plan was that the children continue the struggle at a level higher than his, because they would not be handicapped by education. So I think I did disappoint my parents and my village. Right from the word go, I was active from primary school into secondary school. And so when we go to university, we thought we would be able to change the world. And when I joined Makerere University on the staff, we really believed we could change the world. But the more I went into the world of work, the more we discovered that actually the world of work limited our action a lot more than the university did. And so I was happy to land into the realm of NGOs, which then gave us more latitude. And that's where I met my brother Bad. But all along, I was aware that formal educational action could not bring about revolutionary change. So I was part of a revolutionary movement in Uganda, which was led by a gentleman by the name of Dan Nabudere, who had the policy of going around secondary schools looking for boys and girls with sharp minds. So I was recruited into the revolutionary movement when I was at high school, and I was introduced to Marxism-Leninism when I was at high school. So I was under the influence of Dai Nabdere, and Nabdere had as his tools of the trade Marxism-Leninism. Now, when we were in the NGO world with Bad, we did all manner of things to try and bring about change. One of those projects, I remember very well, was a project to bring musicians from Latin America to sing revolution in Africa. It was a very exciting project. But even there, we discovered that there was a limitation to how much change you could bring about through the NGO world, because it had its sources of funding, and although you believed that that others were funding your program, your NGO, in the final analysis, you were doing somebody else's job, who found that by working with you, they would achieve their objective. And it was impossible for us to achieve very much in the NGO world. And so a turning point comes after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when we were amazed here in Africa, a country we thought was revolutionary. When it collapsed, the leadership of the Soviet Union now said, we want to be like the West. And we knew that the people in the West, They said, no, we don't, anywhere else but here. Anywhere else but here. And so at that moment in time, we started thinking very deeply. And also at that moment in time, changes occurred in our country, Uganda, where we found that our movement, which aimed at capturing state power, could not make headway because a backward political and social force had captured power with the seeming support of the population. And then a new environment happened within our country, that our country had been at war for decades, and now people, war came to an end in 1986, and people believed a new dawn had come, when actually it had not come, and we knew it would be for a long time before they were ready for armed struggle again. At the same time, at the international level, things changed, and there was no appetite to support wars of liberation in Africa, because wars of liberation in Africa mirrored the competition and rivalry between the Soviet Union and the USA. But USSR was no more, and so you had a unipolar world. And that's when it dawned upon us that those of us who had hope in socialism as an answer to our problems were really in for a shock, because the leading socialist country had actually collapsed and could no longer give us the leadership. And so in early 90s, we sat down in our organization and decided to disband ourselves. And the reason we gave for disbanding ourselves was that we had a message, we took it to the people, and it seems it didn't make sense to them. And maybe it was not the answer. And we have no answer in textbooks. And that's all we had as our source of revolutionary ideas. So we said, this was the time for us to go back to our community and see whether there is an answer therein. And each one of us, if after some time, any of us will find that there is an answer which is much better than Marxism-Leninism, then we shall reassemble and give a report and see whether what we found in our communities can be a basis for new action for liberation. So that's how I come up with, in my case, in our group, we said each one of us should develop a program, a project to take them back to their community. And the project I came up with is Mpambo African Multiversity. And because we said knowledge was the key, knowledge was the problem, and we had been using knowledge which is not ours to solve our problems, I said to myself, this is the time to look for our knowledge to solve our problems. And Mpambo African Multiversity was the tool to search for that knowledge as the basis for new praxis.
I'd like to build on what Ndaula has said about the discovery that knowledge lies at the key to the kind of deep changes that we're hoping for in the world today. I left the NGO world and I entered into the academic world. And I entered into it because I had found that the work that I had been doing was being appropriated all the time by academics who would then write it in a different way, put it in a book, and they became experts at stuff that I'd been doing for 20 years working in the NGO world. And so I said, well, if you can't beat them, join them. And I said, maybe I can make some changes in the academic world that will open minds for a new way to understand knowledge. My pathway into understanding knowledge in a different way was informed by my work in Tanzania in the early 70s, where I discovered that women working in coastal areas, or the cattle herders, working in the Maasai and other people, actually had much more knowledge, dramatically more knowledge than any expert, whether they're expatriate or Tanzanian. And yet, none of that knowledge was available to the university. And so I became interested in the way that knowledge could be used if it were, in approaches to gathering and creating knowledge in ways that came from the community, from the people trying to change, from activists, from the social movements themselves, and to see how that knowledge could then be used. So I then ran into people in other parts of the world. I remember the work of John Gaventa at Highlander, and he also was working with knowledge and people's struggles around poverty in Appalachia, one part of the U.S. And he made the point that we can use people's knowledge actually to strengthen the capacity, the organizational capacity of people to change. So I became very interested in looking for sources of transformative, I would call it knowledge, alternative knowledge development, alternative approaches to understanding the world, where it starts from the people themselves. It starts from the women and men experiencing challenges, struggling to make their lives better, struggling against oppressive systems. And so when Wangoola formulated this idea about Mpambo, telling me that this is going to be a multiversity, which not a university like the West, but this is going to be one that provides space for mother tongue scholars to become stronger, to revitalize their own knowledge skills, and to pool that knowledge together in ways that can be used to strengthen their, to build on their lives. I said, this is something that I want to support. It's something I want to learn from, and of course I'm continuing to learn from, and right here at this particular event in Jinja.
When I came back into my community to start Mpambo African Multiversity, I found it extremely difficult. And part of the reason is that it was difficult to get funding for this idea. And so, together with Bud, I came up with some idea to give focus to my new location, to convene a conference under the theme, "We are one people, multiple dreams of another world." So in 2004, we hold that conference here in Jinja, and it did magic, because at that conference I was able to link up with energies in my country, which later on turned out to have the answer. And the people I linked up with are called Basamize in this country. Basamize are the men and women who have lived in our community and have been the depository and keepers of deep knowledge and deep philosophy and the secret of life at the source of the Nile. They have been here since the beginning of history, and so each generation there will be direct heirs in that lineage. So When I came into my community, I thought the level of engagement would be at the cultural level, not at the political level as had been in my earlier life. But when I discovered this team of deep thinkers in my community, they taught me that culture is all right, is higher than politics, but there is something higher than culture, and that something which is higher than culture is spirituality. That is one. Two, they told me that we are in a new age, that actually what I'm saying, I'm fighting to replace, that is colonialism and neo-colonialism, that actually collapsed a long time ago. And so we are living in a new age, the post-colonial, the post-imperialist age. And thirdly, that actually there is a prophecy which tells of that, and further, more prophecy which says that when you find people who had been lost to the Arabs and the Europeans, when you see them coming back home looking for their roots, then if they come back in large enough numbers, then know ye that the move forward to build the new epoch has reached a point of no return. And so after the conference in 2004, it took us years to get the trust of the Basamize, to feel safe with me that they can actually entrust some of their ideas with me. So about 7 years ago, we have a collaborative partnership with the Order of Priests of African Spirituality of Walusi, and they second to me their best theoretician, and that is Chiwanuka Kijo. And we set up what we call an intellectual hot table. But in my language, it's called a jesero. A jesero means boiling point, boiling point. So this is the boiling point of knowledge and awareness. And so at this table, we sit together, and by what? By being each other's teacher and student, the mind, and by bringing different perspectives and different ways of looking at things, the mind of the Basamize blossoms, and so does mine. And so we come up with Tondism, the idea of Tondism. And Tondism being everything, every idea, every procedure, every belief which will enable the African to be self-determined in what truly belongs to them. But there is also a catch here. It's not enough for you to be self-determined. Your self-determination will be anchored and supported by the self-determinations of all other people. And so when everybody else is self-determined, so that is what will consummate your own self-determination. And so I thought this was exciting, and I started learning and hearing that actually the idea that we are in a new epoch is not only at the source of the Nile. It is all around the world, that there was a great turning. And so we started coming up with a new language, coming up with new terms at this intellectual hot table. And that is how the idea of holding a confluence. In 2004 we had a conference, but in 2017 we are having a confluence which which is the coming together of people who are no longer looking for another world, but people who live in another world already. Therefore, to compare notes on the basis of what they are doing and to see what they can learn from one another, what they can learn together, and whether they can come up with a meta vision and mega strategy to be able to advance the global great turning, global Mulembe Mutinzi Cuusansi. So this conference here has been conceived and has brought together men and women who already live in another world. And we, at the intellectual table, we have come to learn that the great turning, that is not an event, it is a process which touches different people differently and at different times. And so, some of us, I'm included, already live in that post-imperialist epoch. Others are even not aware. And the point about building Mulembe Mutinzi is to quicken this building so that a critical mass of our people engage with this Mulembe Mutinzi consciously, because the new epoch objectively is with us, but subjectively is not as yet with us. So it's now our work. This conference is to bring together people who live in that other world, to see how we can quicken the realization, the subjective realization of this Mulembe Mutinzi Cuusansi great turning.
So as Ndaula is talking about Mulembe Mutinzi Cuusansi, and which is being translated here as the Great Turning, this is something that's being experienced and looked for, in all parts of the world, as he says. And in Canada, where I come from, and a number of us who are here at the confluence in Jinja, the experience we've had of the last 10 or 15 years, the insights, many of the insights that we've gained, that relate to knowledge and the Great Turning, have come from the reemergence, of the indigenous, intellectual, indigenous culture, the recognition, the new recognition by some non-indigenous people of the genocidal, period, which in some ways continues on today. But little by little, the insights, new ways of knowing are coming into places like universities, coming into community organizations, so that we now talk at our university about indigenizing law, about Aboriginal education, about indigenous governance, and we have in my School of Public Administration, I'm part of a working group on decolonization of the curriculum. And we're hearing, coming from South Africa, a call for decolonizing of knowledge, because they gained, they threw aside political apartheid, but they have intellectual apartheid still. And even at schools like the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, students are saying, we don't want any more of those white theoreticians. We want the theoreticians coming from the real Africa and the real Orient. And so, I think people, all of those of us who are here, both indigenous and non-indigenous, coming from other parts of the world, are aware that of this, as you talk about, the post-colonial and post-imperialist period, and some of us are living in it, Some of us are looking for that path. Some of us are hanging on, you know, to hopefully that we'll find it, you know. And so the idea, it's been, as we've spoken about this work and the work of Impambo in our settings, you know, in Canada and in England and in India and in Latin America, many places that I go to talk about Impambo, there's great resonance. People relate the Afro descendants in Latin America, the Maori people, you know, from whom we have so much to learn, the Aborigine people in Australia, you know, but also people who aren't necessarily land people, but people who've been discriminated against, people who are despised. What we're after is, and we're coming back to that idea of knowledge and justice, and knowledge and justice. And we see at this confluence, we see a remarkable, you know, creative forces that we want to be part of, we want to contribute to, we want to learn from, and we want to see, you know, move forward, you know, as well as it can, you know, in many, many other parts of the world.
In the name of the oppressed, speaking on, you know, on their behalf, and you know, doing revolution for them. But this time round, I'm bringing the people themselves to speak for themselves directly, and not to speak about what I have taught them or about somebody else's knowledge, but bringing up their knowledge, and not just knowledge, but systematized, and which they've turned into theory. So this is really, you know, this real revolution, and also creating a platform and space for people who had been marginalized, who would have no opportunity to really interact with international people on a basis of equality. And for that reason, may I say, I went to India, I think it was in 2004, for Rajesh Tandon's 20th anniversary. And there, Rajesh Tandon, whose really big event had been funded by donors, I think they must have put in very easily $500,000, very easily. But Rajesh Tandon had this international gathering, and the official language at that conference was Hindi. And so when we sat down to organize this confluence, we said the official language was Luganda, and then English, for us to be able to communicate with our brothers and sisters who do not speak, you know, our language. And so I think this is the first international conference in Uganda where Luganda is the official language. That's one. Two, because we know that what we are doing here is being done by what? By other people around the world. We came up with the idea of spiritual nations, that there are spiritual nations, and so we wanted, and we have convened a meeting of spiritual nations. So we call this Tabamawanga of the spiritual nation, that the spiritual nations are the ones who are in alignment with their land, with their ancestors, and with the God of their land, and therefore are rooted in justice between people, between lands. I really feel that I have achieved to be able to call an international gathering and be in the background and have as the key speakers, as the chief theoreticians, not men and women who have been schooled, but rather those who have been schooled by the community, their ancestors, and the land. The point about building Mulembe Mutinzi is to quicken this building so that a critical mass of our people engage this Mulembe Mutinzi consciously.
Oh yeah.
So my brother,
Great. So far, so good.
it has been a long journey. It continues.
40 more. Here's
40
more.
And 40 more. And can you imagine?
turangirire nzikirize tuddemu tusitule nga tulina ezzadde ly'abaana balobonna tuddemu okusitula emyoyo basebo tebanyema okusitula emyoyo eyo turangirire mu nsi empya nti guno gwe mulembe